Chapter 20. Alistair, POV. I placed Noah on a chair and settled myself down on the left side. After a few seconds, a blushing Arya came in and sat on the right side of Noah. She looked at everywhere except my face.
Hello, Your Majesty. Today we have special on menu. Arya, all by herself, has cooked earth food.
Hayla said as she raised her hand. Green sparks came from her hand as she gracefully swished her hand. The plates and every other cutlery flew and arranged in front of us.
Our dishes include roast chicken, fries, and salad.
She said as the food sets itself on the table. You made this? I asked as I looked at Arya smiling.
Yeah. Noah wanted to eat chicken, and I asked Hayla if we could buy chicken, and she sent guards to Earth to get one.
Oh, okay, I said as I looked at my empty plate. For Noah, I'm not jealous of my son. No, never. I want him to have whatever he wants, but it would be amazing if she thought of me.
And I also didn't know if you eat our food. Even if you do, I didn't know anything of your taste, so I was a bit confused to what I should make. But then I settled with chicken roast, 'cause who doesn't like them? But I hope you will like it.
She said as I smiled internally. She hasn't stopped her habit of murmuring when she is nervous and shy. I always loved this part of her. I've always loved your cooking, I said as she blushed. Vikas and his family joined us, and we started to engage ourselves in conversations as we happily ate our food. Tomorrow, I won't be here at night, I said as everyone looked at me. I have to visit someone, but Vikas will be here to take care of everything, I said as I peeked a look at Vikas. He stared at me in silence, his eyes looking at me in sadness.
Oh, when will you return?
Arya asked, her voice sounding disappointed. I will come at night the next day, I said as she nodded. After a punishment, I know I will be in pain and very weak, and I can't come back like that, so I need some time to heal myself. I just hope one day will be enough.
Papa will come back?
Noah asked as his eyes teared. My eyes widen as I begin to panic. Why are you crying? I asked as I turned him to face me.
What if you won't come back?
He asked as I looked at him in shock. I then looked to Arya to see her just as shocked as me.
Why would you think like that?
Arya asked as she wiped his tears.
I don't know. I'm afraid,
he said as we looked at him in worry. After dinner, we walked to our room as Noah lay on my arms, his head resting on my shoulder. We took him to his room and took him to bed, both of us on either side of him.
Papa, do you love Mommy?
He suddenly asked as we both looked at him yet again, shocked and confused. Of course I do, I said as he nodded.
Then, do you love me?
He asked as I nodded. I love you both, infinite and forever, I said as I kissed his forehead.
So, you won't leave us?
He asked as I looked at him and nodded. Of course, I will never leave you alone. You and your mommy are my world now, I said as he nodded.
That's good,
he whispered before yawning. After he slept, we walked out of his room.
Noah seems to have some kind of trouble,
Arya suddenly said as we closed his bedroom door. I noticed, I said as she looked at me.
I hope it's nothing bad. Maybe we should wait a few more months before joining him to school. He is only turning 5. He is very sensitive when it comes to heart, and I'm afraid something happened in school,
she said as I nodded. Don't worry. Wizard children attend school at the age of 4. Vikas said he had asked the school, but nothing seems to be wrong. But I will look into it tomorrow, I said as she smiled.
He had always wanted a father, especially when he noticed how his neighbor friend's father would always play and take him out. But now I'm so relieved he has a father to depend on,
she said as I walked to her. What about you? I asked as I trapped her to the wall.
What?
She asked, her voice stuttering. Are you relieved? I am finally with you? I asked as I gently caressed her flushed cheeks.
I...
She stuttered, her chocolate brown orbs looking into my blue ones. I missed your blush, I said as I kissed her cheek. She shuddered and whispered as I groaned at her sound. I missed your smooth silk skin, I whispered as I caressed her upper arm. I then leaned and placed my head on her neck. I missed your smell, I said before kissing her neck. I started placing wet kisses all over her neck as she whimpered and grabbed onto my shirt. I sucked under her ear, and she let out a moan as I smirked. I missed the moan you make when I suck your sensitive spot, I said as I felt her legs trembling. She looked at me in trace, and I fell in love more and more. I leaned in, as did she, the distance between us reducing fast. I felt her shiver when my breath hit her cheek. I growled as I slammed my lips to hers as she moaned. She immediately kissed back. It was slow and intimate, full of love and longing. I bit and sucked on her bottom lips as she moaned and whimpered. We separate when our lungs started to scream for air.
That was...
She said through the breaths as I smiled. You should rest, love, I said as she nodded, still in trace.
Okay. Good night,
She whispered before turning and walking into her room. Good night, my queen, I said before she smiled and shut the door. I groaned and walked back to my room, giving out a string of curses for being in separate rooms. I want her so fucking bad.
Ariana, POV. I slid down the door as I touched my lips. It was giving out a warm sensation. He kissed me. I kissed him back. It was magical. I never felt so happy and secure. I felt like in heaven. Arya, what is wrong with your heart? I whispered to myself as I put my hand on my aching chest. Suddenly, the room started to fill with blue sparkles. It entered from the opened window. I stood up and looked around as they shined like millions of fireflies. They began to move around the room before they flew around me in spiral. It felt like they were hugging me. It felt so familiar. The heat, the feeling.
Good night.
It arranged itself as I smiled. It then rearranged themselves into a human form who bowed at me. I smiled as I bowed back, knowing exactly who it is. Good night, Alistair, I said as I watched the fireflies flew out the window. Chapter 21. Ariana, POV. Vicus, can I come with you to pick up Noah? I asked as he was walking out the front door.
Of course you can. Here.
He said as he swished his hands. A moment later, I was draped in a yellow hooded cloak which matched my dress. Why? I asked as he smiled.
In case you hate attention.
He said, smirking as I looked at him confused. I walked out with him out the palace and made my way to the busy market.
How is Obsidian so far for you?
He asked, giving me a quick side glance. All right, I guess. Only 2 days here, so I can't say much. But as of now, it's good. Hayla is a good teacher, though, I said as he smiled at me.
I'm glad she is. Hayla was actually trained to be queen since young. She was arranged to marry Alistair when they were young. I remember when she came into the castle. She was the daughter of the great noble Lorenzo. My first impression of her was a rich snob girl who walks around head raised and never has fun. But then one day, I found her in the forest playing in the rain. She was so beautiful and full of life, unlike the other times I saw her. We started off as secret friends then. We would sneak out of the palace and meet at that place. It's the same place I fell in love with her. Our first kiss, my proposal, everything. It's like our special paradise,
he said as I looked at his face, which showed only love and happiness.
When her father found out, He was furious. He forbid her to meet me and locked her up. He requested and initiated her marriage with Alistair. But that was the day when Alistair left the kingdom and stayed in Earth with you. Taking that as a chance, we both presented our love before the terrain. Well, that, and also the fact that she was pregnant. The kingdom was against us, but we started getting the support of the commons. They actually protected us and helped us. The king and nobles had no choice because of the involvement of the commoners. In the end, I married the love of my life and lived happily ever after.
He said. That is so romantically cute. I fangirled as he laughed.
So is yours.
He said, as I looked at him shocked. You know our story? I asked, as he nodded and grinned.
Of course. During his stay here, he only talked about a certain kind-hearted, stubborn brunette who always makes him feel giddy. His words, not mine.
He smirks at me as I blush. I wish I could remember it, I said as I look at my hands.
It's hard to regain a memory lost, but a memory wipe out by a king is even more powerful. It's almost permanently lost.
He said, as he sneaks a peek at me. I would have small glimpses, though. Like in some cases, I'll feel like this happened before, I said as he nodded.
Perhaps triggers of memory, I guess. You should ask him about your story.
He said, as I nodded. I will. Mommy! Noah shouted as he ran to me. Hey, baby boy, how was class? I asked, as he suddenly turned mute. Good, he said, before asking me to pick him up. I obliged to his command, and he giggled as he kissed my cheek.
Queen!
A voice aroused, followed by many grasps and whispers. I looked around uncomfortably as they all looked at me, whispering and giving me looks. Some looked at me in sympathy, and some in anger. Noah buried himself deeper into my shoulder, trying to hide from them.
Maybe we should go,
Vicus said, suddenly, nervous and afraid. He glared at the people around and swirled his hands as a cloak almost similar to mine wrapped around Noah. We walked back fast through the market as I felt them following us. She is the reason the king is going to suffer, I heard one say as I passed by.
But he did it for love. He is so romantic,
said another. We reached the palace as the people were blocked by the guards. Vicus, is anything wrong with Alistair? I asked as he looked at me in worry.
Nothing happened, Arya. Ignore what people say. Look, Noah is almost asleep. Take him to sleep,
he said before bowing and walking away. A wave of uneasiness spreads me as I took Noah to bed. Something feels off.